Hi and welcome to another video by Get It Done Home Repairs. Today we're going to be refinishing these floors because as you can see in the different spots around on it, it's worn out from just normal foot traffic. Now part of it over here in the one corner is really not that bad because obviously it doesn't get much foot traffic, but you'll see up in the front here where it's worn away. Alright, and once it's worn away like that, we just decided to redo the entire floor itself instead of trying to put a clear coat over the top of it. So we're going to change the color as well. Alright, so what we're going to do first is we're going to come in here with a drum sander, and we're going to do a sanding just to clear off most of the coating that's on there. Okay, now before we get started, we are going to tape up the doorways so that we don't have a lot of the dust getting all around throughout the rest of the house. We're going to tape up along the ceiling, along the walls, so that way we can put plastic up and minimize the amount of dust that's going to be around the house. Now the drum sander itself does have a vacuum on it, but you'll still wind up with a very, very small coating of dust around the entire house. So that's why we're going to close it all off with tape to minimize the amount of dust throughout the entire house. Okay, now once everything is all taped up, we come in here with our drum sander and we put the very coarse paper on there. We're using two different grits paper. One is 36 and the other is 80. And you can see two different colors as well. So we're going to use the heavier grit first, which would be the 36, and we're going to sand it down so we can put a test spot on the new floor to see what color we're going to do. Okay, now after we sanded down a test spot, we're going to put the colors on just to see what color we're going to be putting on the rest of the floor. And once we determine what color we're going to use, then we're going to continue and sand the rest of the floor. Okay, now we taped up the other side where we're going to be working, and we also taped up the inside to minimize the amount of dust that's going to be getting around on the rest of the house. So we taped it up on the inside as well as the outside. Now we're going to pull the plastic back and we're going to run the disc, the drum sander. We're going to run it with the grain of the wood. And we're just going to keep it moving. We're going to have one row overlapping the second row, so that way it's a nice, straight, even sand. And we're not going to get any kind of bumpy area where the drum is going to dig down further. As you can see, it's overlapping the previous run. And we just continue with that with the 36 grit. We're going to sand it all down. And then once we sand it down with the 36, then we'll come around with the smaller type sander and we'll clean up the edges. This does everything, but it will not do close to the molding. And as you can see here, we have that one piece of wood into the other room that goes the opposite direction, which we're not going to sand as well. This is the smaller sander that we're going to use to go around and do the edging very close to the woodwork itself, so that we can get in there to get a nice clean sand on the area that's real close to the woodwork. That big drum sander is just too big to get in there and do very close. So this is what we're going to use to clean up the rest of the area around the perimeter. Okay, so once we finish the one run, we're going to turn the sander around and we're going to do the other way up to the woodwork again, leaving that tiny space that we're going to come in with the smaller sander. And again, you remember you're going with the grain. You always follow the grain of the wood. You don't go against it, you go with the grain. Okay, and once we finish sanding everything, you can see it all looks nice and clean. And now we're going to continue around the perimeter and we'll get that sanded down as well. once we finish with the sander, then we come in with a hand sander to get into the corners and the real tight areas, because you won't be able to get in there with any kind of a sander at all. So we're going to do that manually by hand with the hand scraper, all the corners where we couldn't get into. Clean it all the way. Okay, now that we're finished with our first sanding, we're going to come in here with a finer grit paper, and we're going to go over the entire area a second time to make it even smoother before we apply the stain on top. Okay, now this is what the floor looks like after we've done our sanding around the perimeter and across all of the surface area itself. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in with a very, very fine sandpaper, and we're going to sand it real quick before we put the final coat of color over the top. Okay, the edge where it goes down into the sunken living room, that we need to do that by hand to clear it all away. So we're going to scrape off all of the finish on there, and then we're just about finished. Okay, now after we're finished with all of our sanding, we're going to come in here with the vacuum. We're going to clean all of the dust off of here before we apply the color on top of the wood. So let's vacuum everything out, and then we're going to continue with it. Okay, the next thing we're going to do now is after we vacuumed everything down, is we're going to apply the stain to the wood itself. Now, there's different ways you can apply stain. You could put it on with a paintbrush. You could put it on with a roller. There's lots of different ways to do it. We actually chose to do it with this type of a brush here so that we can spread it around a little bit quicker. And the smaller areas, we'll do that by hand. And now we're going to follow the grain of the wood to apply the stain to the wood itself. The edges, remember, it goes a different direction, so we're actually going to do that with the paintbrush so that it actually goes the grain of the wood. All right, and now after we have our stain applied, we're going to let this sit. Usually you would let it sit overnight to dry thoroughly, and then we'll come back in and we'll put the clear coat over the top of it. But for now, we're done until it dries. Okay, so after it dried overnight, we came back in and we applied our satin finish over the top of it. Now, I know it looks very shiny, but once this dries, it will have that satin color to it. It will not be a very high gloss. It'll be much less of a shine. We applied it with a roller, but you can apply it with a brush if you choose to as well. The reason we did it with a roller is it went a little bit quicker, and we could speed up the job just a little bit. All right, so now we're going to let it dry again, and we'll put our second coat on shortly. Okay, now this is our second coat, and we chose to go with a satin finish. Once this dries thoroughly, then we'll come in here and we'll sand this very lightly to get at any kind of little bumps or any kind of inconsistencies in the satin finish. And then we'll come in and put our third and final coat over the top of this. Okay, now after we finished sanding it very, very lightly, just to get all of the little bumps and imperfections out of the second coat, before we apply our third coat, we came in here and we vacuumed everything off again to get all the dust out of it. And now we're going to apply our third and final coat, and then this job will be done. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.